If you're about to start a transformation, it's time to call a timeout. There's key things that you need to get done before you start your transformation, and that's what I'm going to talk about here today. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world with their digital transformation journeys. And one of the common phenomena we see with organizations going through transformations is they define a digital strategy, they select the software, and they jump in and start implementing stuff. And that point of decision of what direction you're going to go and the start of the actual implementation usually ends up too compressed, and we end up starting the implementation before we're ready. We end up spending too much time and money. We get off course because we haven't clearly defined our needs. We haven't clearly defined our roadmap, our plan, and a bunch of other things that need to be done before you start your implementation. So what I want to talk about today are the handful of things that you need to do before you begin your transformation. When you get proposals from your vendors that include a proposed project plan, it's two problems. One is it's usually overly optimistic as far as how long it's going to take, how many resources it's going to require. Secondly, it's usually incomplete. It doesn't include all the non-vendor, non-software specific things that need to happen during a transformation. So things like organizational change management, process improvements, data migration, data mapping, integration to other systems, things like that all need to be accounted for and factored into your implementation plan. And in many cases, those activities are actually what drive your overall time and cost. So when you get your input from your software vendor, consider it just one input, one piece of your complete implementation plan. Don't base your entire implementation on that one plan because it's just one work stream within the overall plan. So that's one of the first things you want to do is make sure you have a very clear implementation plan that focuses on establishing a very solid foundation before you begin the technical implementation. And I'll get to some of those points here in a second. The next thing that needs to happen before you begin your implementation is to define your future state business processes. And a lot of organizations intuitively think that why don't we just wait until we implement the software, we'll let the vendor come in, the software will tell us or dictate to us how we're going to set up our business processes. There's a couple problems here. One is that today's ERP systems are so flexible in general that they can handle simple workflows or even the most basic workflows a multitude of different ways. So if you don't have the answer or the direction of how you want the software to work, you're going to be spinning your wheels trying to make decisions while the meter's running on all the expensive technical consultants. The second reason why you want to focus on defining your macro business processes up front, and even more important than the first reason, is that you want to define those things that are unique differentiators for you, things that are unique to your business model, things that make you different from your competitors. You want to define those processes and what you want that future state to look like so that you can define for the software vendor what you want your business to look like, rather than assuming that the software vendor will tell you how to run your business. Certainly, there's going to be certain parts of your business like accounts payable or general ledger that are more basic or vanilla in nature, and chances are you might be able to settle for whatever the software does in those areas. But when it comes to the customer experience, when it comes to unique differentiators for how you provide superior service or a superior product to your customers, those business processes you want to focus a lot of time on making sure you define those up front so that you have a clear blueprint for how you're going to deploy the technology later on. Just as you need to define what your future state business processes look like, you also need to define what your future state organization is going to look like. If you're going to consolidate your procurement department, for example, or you're going to move to a shared service HR model or shared services within accounting and finance, you want to define what that all looks like. How are you going to be organized? What are roles and responsibilities going to look like so that you can involve those people affected by those changes, you can involve them in the transformation, and also so you have a clear vision for how you're going to deploy the technology and you're not spinning your wheels making those decisions while you're trying to implement technology. So if you have that clear vision of what the organization is going to look like on the other side, that's going to give you a lot more clarity and a lot more efficiency and effectiveness to how you deploy new technology. It's often assumed that a digital transformation is going to consist of one single ERP system that's going to do everything for us. It's very rare that that ever truly materializes. Most organizations, even if they find that an ERP system does 80 or 90% of what they need it to do, they're still going to have other bolt-on systems, other technologies they need to integrate to. for regulatory reasons or because there's weaknesses in the ERP system. And by the way, every ERP system out there has weaknesses that you'll need to address. And oftentimes the way to address that is through bolt-on systems. So you need to define what that future state technology and roadmap is. And it's not just the enterprise technologies you have to think about. You also have to think about how we're going to interface to other non-enterprise technologies. So for example, if there's email approvals or things that you're going to do in SharePoint outside the system and it's going to somehow integrate back to your ERP system, those are just two small examples of how you'd want to make sure you have a clear roadmap from a technology perspective of how all these pieces are going to fit together. Most organizations simply don't find that one single solution is going to solve all their problems. Typically, it's a multitude of different technologies and tools, and you need a clear roadmap for how to tie that all together. One of the biggest indicators of how long your project is going to take and how much it's going to cost and how painful it's going to be is how you address organizational change management. In other words, organizational change management is typically going to be on your critical path for your implementation. So when you're building out your implementation plan and when you're in this implementation readiness phase of you've selected software but you're not quite ready to implement yet, you want to define what that organizational change strategy is. And it all begins with two things: an organizational assessment, which is an understanding and an analysis of your business and your organization benchmarked to other cultures and other organizations, so that you can identify where those pockets of resistance are likely to come from. And secondly, change impact. So how is it the jobs are going to be impacted? How is it that the future state organization is going to look, and how are we going to get there? What's the plan? How are we going to migrate to that? All that stuff should be incorporated into your overall implementation plan and strategy. And again, that's something that will determine whether or not you finish on time, on budget or not. And by the way, the more effectively you handle organizational change management and the more time and money you spend on change management, it's more than likely going to reduce your costs and reduce your overall implementation duration and risk as well. It's important to go into these projects with a mindset that you are in charge of this project. You, the implementing organization, are responsible for managing the system integrator and the vendors. So therefore, you need to have your own PMO, your own project governance and controls established. You can't just rely on a software vendor to provide governance and controls, partly because that's not their specialty, but also because, again, they're just one part of the overall transformation. You need more of a program governance and controls to manage not just the technology, but some of the other pieces that we've talked about here today: change management, process improvement, architecture, integration, data migration, all that stuff. That all needs to be managed underneath an umbrella of project governance and controls. So the better job you can do establishing those governance controls up front, it's going to give you more ownership, more control, and more buy-in into the overall project. And it's also going to make it a lot less likely that the software vendor is going to come in and hijack the project and run it for you. It's going to allow you to be in the driver's seat and let the software vendor take more of a support role. So these are just a few of the important things that you need to make sure you have in place prior to beginning your transformation. And we commonly refer to this at third stage as the implementation readiness phase. And again, that's the phase from the time you've decided what your technical roadmap's going to be until you actually start the implementation. Most organizations just jump straight into the implementation. They don't have a gap there, or they don't have time to prep. And what I'm suggesting here is that it's very important that you take one step back to be able to take two steps forward. That one step back is to take the time to get that implementation readiness in place, get that solid foundation and blueprint in place so that you can be successful in your transformation. So I've included some other resources below that are meant to build on some of these concepts. I've included a number of downloads, videos, etc. in the description below, so I encourage you to check those out. Most notably is our annual digital transformation report, which includes best practices for transformation, as well as some of the independent software reviews and top 10 rankings that we do every year. So I encourage you to check out some of those resources to help you through your transformation. And if you have questions or you'd like to have a sounding board for how to make your project more successful, either in the implementation readiness phase or any other phase of your transformation, feel free to reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. I'd be happy to be an informal sounding board for you. So I hope you found this information useful and have a great day.